Support for Designed By comes from generous donations from listeners like you. Visit aidesigncorps.org/donate.
I wanted people to go on a journey through Texas and the American South and the U.S. and hear the names of entrepreneurs, hear the names of everyday people, extraordinary people. So that was my goal. I'm glad you got that. And oh my gosh, you bringing up Miss Lucille's name is so important. The first time I heard her name is because Tony Tipton Martin, James Beard Award-winning cookbook author. She wrote Jemima Code. She has a ton of books. She's written and talked about her so many times. And just to hear that her name is in the mouths of folks like you, that's so freaking important. And her grandson, Chris Williams, he's amazing. He has a restaurant in Houston, and he carries on her legacy of entrepreneurship and, doing things just beyond the ordinary in the kitchen. And so that's what I wanted to do in the book. I wanted it to be more than just cook these recipes on Juneteenth. It's going to serve, hopefully, as an artifact of Black life now and Black life, 1865 and beyond.
Scanning all frequencies. Hello.
Welcome to Designed By, the nexus where design meets visionary leadership. Today, we're stirring the pot in the world of the culinary arts with a visionary who crafts more than just meals. She designs experiences. I could not be more excited to introduce you to my friend, Nicole Taylor. Nicole is an extraordinary culinary innovator, and she's an author whose latest work, Watermelon and Redbirds, is not just a cookbook, but it's a celebration of flavor and culture. This vibrant book offers over 75 recipes that range from refreshing drinks like the Afro-Egg Cream and Marigold Gin Sours to savory dishes like peach jam molasses glazed chicken thighs and super innovative salads like the simplicity of Cantaloupe with Feta. It's a beautiful book. I keep it on my kitchen counter from spring to fall and love it so much that I've read it cover to cover twice. And if that wasn't enough, the essays and recipes inspire not only festive gatherings, but moments of learning and joy throughout the year. Beyond the books, though, Nicole has penned for the New York Times, Bon Appétit, and Food and Wine. She's also a James Beard Award-nominated writer, and her journey from Georgia to Brooklyn has influenced her rich narrative. Nicole is calling in today to share how she's crafted a life where every choice is intentional and every dish tells a story. So Nicole, my friend, where does your story begin?
Design the future.
My journey begins in a small college town in Georgia, to be more specific, Athens, Georgia, home of the University of Georgia. I was born in the mid-'70s. I was a love child. My mom had me at 25. My father was living in Chicago. And I was raised in the house that my grandfather left to my mother and my two aunts and uncles. So I was raised amongst adults because none of them had kids. So I'm the only niece and nephew at my mom's side. And I didn't meet my father until I was maybe 10. And he died maybe 10 years ago, if I do the math right, 2015. And I met him 5 times. But I will say, I say that, but I didn't even realize that was weird until I went off to college at Clark Atlanta University. And I was like, wait, people's parents are dropping them off and putting their room together. I just got dropped off with my stuff. And I had stuff, I had scholarships. I had a very strong community and support system of people in Athens who supported me. But that's when I realized, oh, girl, you different. You've been different your entire life. Because I was so used to being the smart kid in the family who read all the time, who got into everything, who started cooking really young, who was involved in a million things. But when I, started matriculating at Clark Atlanta University, one of the largest historically Black colleges and universities in the country, I was like, hold up, there are a million other Nicole Taylors. There are a million other brilliant, cultured Black women. And so I would tell you, though, that even though I love being at that institution, I sometimes felt a little not confident about who I was. I didn't know how to be in an environment where there were so many people just like me. I wasn't sure how to tap into my greatness among so many other great people.
What did you do about kind of getting, because that's so not who you are today.
I know, right?
Yeah.
I mean, people that I went to college with would say that that wasn't me. I worked a lot. I did not have the best grades. It took me 5 years to get out of there. Um, but I had my own apartment. I was always the place where everyone wanted to come and hang and eat and drink and gather people. That's always been my MO. I got a job straight out of college working at the American Cancer Society. My undergraduate degree is in community health education. So I always thought that I would get my master's in public health and kind of go into the space of public health education. And I did for a while. It was not in my bingo card to be a food writer and cookbook author. You couldn't have told me that 20, 30, almost 30 years ago. I'd be like, what? Nah.
Well, I have very similar, I would say very similar story. And that although I would like flip it around a little bit, I said my first was a love child.
I like that.
Yeah. But that and I look at it, but you're absolutely right. I mean, if somebody had said you'd be where you were today, what are you on? What are you smoking? That wasn't even in the cards. I didn't know that it was possible.
Yeah, I food was always, and gathering people was always in the background. I didn't even know what a food writer was per se. I will say that I always read lots and lots of magazines. I didn't own my first cookbook until college. Actually, one of my college roommates gave me the Better Homes and Gardens cookbook that I still have. So it's like a paper version. And that book has been out probably, a half century plus. So she gave me that book. That was the first cookbook I ever owned. And I got that in college because I cooked so much. And she gave it to me and she wrote inside of it. But prior to that, I looked at recipes through magazines. I would take my money and buy like Right On magazines, but more so I would see people in the family have the Ebony magazine and Essence magazine, very Black cultural lifestyle magazines. I'm the person who definitely went to the bookstore or the grocery store and bought aspirational magazines. So that's all I knew about food. I didn't know anything like what a food writer was or a creative director or a graphic designer. I had no clue.
So how is it so you say, okay, fantastic. You love food. What is the impetus behind you going, I can start writing about it? Tell me a little bit of the story, how you get from college to,
Yeah.
your first endeavor into food, like professionally.
Yeah. So I'm in Atlanta, I am, a professional. I'm working at the American Cancer Society. I have a nice apartment and I'm like obsessed with going to restaurants in Atlanta. So like new openings, the old school spots, the hole in the wall spots. And I remember a friend at the time, I actually dabbled in real estate a little bit. I got my real estate license during the same time period that I was working for nonprofits and doing a lot of community-based work. And this friend said, you should do like your own zagat. And I'm like, what? What's that? And at that moment, I started collecting zagat, like the paper ones. The paper ones don't even exist anymore. And I remember getting an Atlanta one. Did they even have an Atlanta one? I definitely had a New York one. And I was like, oh, okay. So she's talking about listings. I'm like, oh, all right. She's like, you are the person that always has a list. Of course, this was pre-social media. I don't even know if Yelp was out then. And I knew then, like, okay, I have a thing that I'm the go-to person around food. And I'm also the person that people like to gather with. So I knew it then. I met Adrian, my husband Adrian, at a networking event in Atlanta. I've always been entrepreneurial. I'm telling you these two other things I did, but I also dabbled with having a candy company, like making homemade chocolate. And so one of my college friends and I partnered, and it was called the Butterfly Nook, and then it became Tailor Made Chocolate. And I met Adrian because we were there selling our candy. They were like shaped candies, right? We would melt the chocolate and mold them and put them in cellophane bags. And I met Adrian because we were at a networking event, and he was the host. So what he did was he took the list and merged it into his personal newsletter list. I don't even think it was a newsletter at the time. And so he started sending people, he would regularly send out emails about his artwork or about whatever he was working on. Kind of smart, because that was like 20 something years ago, right? And I was like, what is this list? How did I get on it? I'm like, oh, wait, this is the guy that was at the door of this networking event. So to make a long story short, I ended up reaching out to him because I was like, I need a logo design. And really, Adrian is the person who opened my entire life and world up to creativity. I didn't really understand it and get it. I was into art then. I was really big into folk art, American folk art. And he found that interesting, but he's the person who like unlocked creativity. So we started dating, moved in together very quickly, and got married. And then the following year, we moved to New York. And when we moved to New York, the first job I had here, I was working for a parks and green space advocacy group. So it was in line with the same thing that I've been doing in Atlanta. But I was obsessed with food. I'm obsessed with restaurants. So this was pre-iPhone. I would write my list of like all the restaurants and bakeries and places that I wanted to just check out the front door and know where they were. You know, maybe I wasn't eating there that day, but I wanted to know like where Gramercy Tavern was, you know, where Magnolia Bakery was, what the food at X place tasted like. So I started doing that because I knew that there was something else inside of me. I've always loved New York. I wanted to move to New York for so long. So that was kind of like my entree, my self-education into the New York dining scene. And then one day, I, got so obsessed with Murray's cheese. And then they took me down a rabbit hole. I got obsessed with Saxelby cheese. Rest in peace, the late Anne Saxelby. She had the first all-American cheese shop on the Lower East Side. And I started getting her newsletter. And it had a little message in there about a podcast, a Heritage Radio Network. And I'm like, woo, could I do a podcast? I knew what a podcast was because I used to listen to NPR News and Notes. This was at a time when like a lot of NPR, KCRW stations were taking their show and putting them on making it available to the iPod. Remember the iPod?
I do remember the iPod.
So I was obsessed with listening to stuff on the iPod. So I'm like, oh, I know what a podcast is. And this was a time when people did not understand podcasts. They didn't even know what it was.
Yeah. And
Heritage Radio Network was a network of food podcasts. So I took a day off work and I was like, I gotta like feed this food thing. I gotta do something around food. And I called them on the phone. I didn't even send the email. And I just cold pitched them and said, hey, I would love to have the show specifically talking to Black and brown people in New York that's doing food work in Brooklyn and beyond. And they were like, okay, cool. Can you come in and just kind of like test how you are on air? What are your ideas? I was like frozen. I couldn't even believe it. I took Adrian with me the day that I went to talk with Jack Inslee, And I have a photo of that day, which is kind of funny. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And he was just like, be yourself.
Yeah.
That's the advice he always gave me. Be yourself and to bring my curiosity in the door. So yeah, I did like almost 200 episodes, produced specials for the network. That was my entree into food media. And from that point, people started asking me to write about stuff. And I'm like, oh, am I a writer? I'm not a writer. I was turning down opportunities to write about food. Now I remember a colleague asking me to teach one of her classes at like NYU or even New School, and I was like, no, because I didn't feel worthy. I didn't feel like I had done the work. Eventually, towards the end of the period at Heritage Radio Network, I got a cookbook deal because I felt like everyone everyone around me was getting cookbook deals. I felt like that's what I needed to do next. So that happened. You know, I hit the ground. I can't even say it happened because I worked my ass off to get that tiny book deal. And I left Heritage, and then things kind of took off after that. A lot of hard work, but yeah, that was my entree. That podcast was my entree into the New York City food media world.
Oh, that's
That was called Hot
fantastic.
Grease.
What was it
Hot
called
Grease.
again?
Hot Grease.
Hot Grease. All right. Ooh, Hot Grease. That's a great name. That's a fabulous name.
Scrappy, very scrappy, but it
Yeah.
still holds up.
Yeah, it absolutely does. It does. When you were talking about, kind of going there and then jumping into the world of, you go from, culinary media and then going culinary media to culinary publishing. What was that jump like? Like, what were some of the things that made that hard or easy, or even some of the decisions that you had to make kind of along that journey? Because that's a tough one. Because when you've got a gig and you're going, now I'm going to go into a place that feels a little ambiguous, but I know it's something I want.
Yeah. I mean, well, first of all, during the podcast era, I made no money. That was very much like a volunteer. You're just doing this to build your career. And I was still working in New Yorkers for Parks. So I had no real clue or really understanding food media beyond reading it. I did train myself. I did a education of like, I had a notebook of like knowing every editor at the New York Times and understanding who were the top 5 publishers. So I would say the challenges were that I was teaching myself everything, and there was no one around me in my close circle that I could go to and ask a very specific question, saying like, hey, this is my cookbook proposal. Would you look over it? What do you think? Do you know any editors, or do you know any literary agents? There was no one in my circle. I think what helped me is that I built this community of believers, with people who saw something in me, and at random moments, these people would show up and they would say, oh, what are you working on? I'll be like, yeah, I finished a book proposal and I'm trying to figure out what to do next. And they would be like, email me. And I would email, and then that person just so happened to be a book editor, and I didn't know. I only knew them from being at like food potlucks, geeking out over mushrooms, and never just asked like, oh, what do you do at your day job? So I've had so many people to correct my, not even correct, but just to like scoop in and fill in the gaps when I didn't know anything. But that was the biggest hurdle of not knowing in the very beginning, just being inexperienced. But I also think
not even knowing what you don't know. I always look at it as like there's not knowing, and then there's not even knowing what you need to know.
But I do think now, kind of looking back, some of those moments of not knowing have kind of built me up in a way to be a vessel for someone who's in the same position. So
I think you're absolutely right. And I actually think that it proves out a little bit more something you're not giving yourself credit for is resiliency, because everything that
Mm.
you've tried isn't easy, right? Like like dedicating yourself to the podcast, having this phenomenal name and building that audience and doing so without any dollars behind it is not easy. Right? At all,
Oh
because
yeah.
you're making hard choices about your time and the effort, but it had to been fueled by passion.
Oh, 100%. I mean, listen, Heritage Radio Network, people in the food world, they know the network because it's all food shows. I mean, at the time, there were only a handful. They were a very hipster organization in the garden of Roberta's Pizza in 2 shipping containers. So they were, this hip, cool radio station doing creative things. And I was the only Black host at the very beginning. And I was bringing in Karen Washington, who is a legend in New York City community gardening world before everyone knew Karen Washington was. I was bringing in so many notables and talking about things that, back in 2014, no one was talking about, like Juneteenth. or or I was talking about MLK birthday every year and what people were doing around the country in the name of food to celebrate them. And sometimes, I know that I made an impact in the podcasting world when I see Heritage Radio Network reposting in their newsletter old podcasts that I did, 10 years ago. So, no, it was a great learning lesson of consistency, how to be consistent every single Monday for 4 or 5 years. I showed up, no money, and took my butt to Bushwick, bought pizza for people sometimes. Sometimes I would have to take a cab on there because I was running late. But I was consistent. So I would say, now that I'm talking to you, the biggest lesson that I learned from that moment of how to be consistent no matter what.
With Juneteenth just around the corner, it's time to start planning a celebration that's as vibrant and meaningful as the holiday itself. Let me introduce you to the must-have cookbook of this summer, Watermelon and Redbirds, a cookbook for Juneteenth and Black celebrations by the one and only Nicole Taylor. On June 19, 1865, Major General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, with the news that all enslaved people were now free. This momentous day sparked Juneteenth celebrations filled with music, dance, and of course, delicious food. Nicole Taylor's cookbook is a treasure trove of over 75 recipes that bring the spirit of Juneteenth to life. So slide over to Amazon.com and get your copy of Watermelon and Redbirds today. And let's make Juneteenth unforgettable.
What's the secret to being successful in the corporate world? Embracing your Latinidad as a Latina woman. Find out all the secrets on A La Latina podcast, the playbook to succeed being your authentic self. Listen to the podcast A La Latina, now on your favorite podcast platform.
Hey listeners, super exciting news. I'm going to let you in on a top secret innovation that Vibes AI has been working on. Vibes AI has just dropped new audio vibrational therapies. If you're looking to enhance your memory, relaxation, focus, or overall cognitive wellness, this one's for you. Vibes AI has been working with certified sound and music therapists to design vibrational audio therapies that are designed to connect your body, mind, and intention. You can choose vibrational therapies that reduce anxiety, encourage deep focus, enhance concentration, and improve cognitive function, bringing you back to a healthy alignment. Don't miss out on this incredible cognitive wellness innovation. I want you to open up your favorite podcasting platform and search for Vibes AI, or simply ask Alexa, open Vibes Therapy to follow the Vibes AI frequency.
Welcome back.
You know what? That is an important lesson. I don't think enough of us think about and the importance of it, because it's consistency that builds the trust. And especially New York City is, and I think the song is right. And you've probably experienced it, that if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. And there are certain conditions in this city that I love, and then there's certain things that are a little hard. And when you're getting started out, one of the things that I think New York does incredibly well, particularly Brooklyn, in some of the smaller communities, is being able to get out, meet the people, and then number two, building that trust. And it is the consistency that builds the trust, right? And you're building trust amongst, in novel ways, because everybody here is a creator. Like you're in a creator community, no matter what industry you're in. You could be in financial services, you could be in healthcare. I have yet to walk into it with like, oh, well, that's a really boring person or uninteresting person, I say accountants, I always feel like always get the worst rap, and they're some of the most creative thinkers I've ever met. Did you find the eclectic nature, kind of the melting pot, remarkably different than the African American experience in Atlanta? Like, how did those two things differ?
I mean, just to put it in context, I was creating I was making a podcast and being in community at the rise of the Brooklyn hipster food scene. So when you talk about donuts and jam, and remember all of the SNL memes about Mass Brother chocolates and riding with your bike with a latte, like literally, I was right there. I can rattle off names of people that started their companies literally in their apartments, and I was right there. I had never experienced being in community with so many diverse people. I'm just going to keep it real. I grew up in a town that was very Black and white.
Gotcha.
Athens, Georgia. You love UGA or you don't. I didn't love UGA. I wasn't a fan. I went to Atlanta and I got an experience that you can't get anywhere. And that is to see Black people and Black excellence in a way that very few cities give you. Mm-hmm. So I was able to really see that on every level, and to touch it and feel it and be a part of that and understand what it means to strive, survive, and thrive in a big city and in a community that's Black. But I will tell you that I had friends of all different walks of life, but people in Atlanta, people don't want to have this conversation. They don't get together across neighborhoods like they should, right?
That's an interesting thing too, because I got to tell you, I grew up in a very similar city. Flip it, but it was Latino excellence. So I grew up in San Antonio, Texas. And, I grew up, first of all, I had never experienced what race meant, because when your city is 80% your racial makeup and Latino excellence, like our mayor was Latino, my mother was in business. You can look at it through the lens of your race and go, well, if everybody's like me, and then I've got these pictures of what greatness can be, because when we were together, but intermingle, it was it was very similar. And the difference was it was actually Latino and white. Okay.
Yeah, Atlanta. I mean, that's a conversation that a lot of people don't want to have. I mean, I would like to think that it's probably changed. I mean, listen, I'm a bit older. I do see that some of the younger kids, the Gen Y, Gen X, some of those barriers have been brought down from them because their parents are no longer just going to certain neighborhoods. They're living in Buckhead now. They're buying a house in Buckhead.
Yeah.
So it's a little different. But when I came to New York, two things, like now when everyone's saying Black-owned business and shop nothing but Black-owned for the entire weekend, I was doing that in Atlanta, and not by like forcing. It was just because like, oh, I didn't even realize it.
Wait,
Like my
because
cleaner.
the best locally owned businesses were Black owned.
Exactly. But when I moved to Bedford-Stuyvesant, a neighborhood that I chose on purpose because it felt like an Atlanta Black neighborhood, because it is a traditionally Black neighborhood, I felt at home, and I wanted that sense of home and community, and that same thing of I go 5 days and I'm shopping nothing but Black owned spots, and I don't even realize it because I'm amongst Black excellence. That happened in New York. But I will say that just through who I am, all kind of people were at our apartment. My husband is an artist. You know, I was growing into my creativity. So I was learning more about Japanese food because, you know, some of my closest friends became, you know, in New York, just so happened to be Japanese, and they're married to a Black guy. You know, like I was experiencing so much culturally. Like there's a big, beautiful mosque in Bed-Stuy, and I got a chance to understand, and not even understand, but to see a Eid celebration, like, and how beautiful it is, and hear a mosque bell ring and not just a church bell ring. So New York City just opened me up to understanding where my excellence sits in the larger world, and where my food fits into the larger world. So that's what New York City did for me.
That's pretty amazing. You know, I always find that people get here and they either love it or they hate it, but they're never ambivalent about it. What do you think? What was kind of, you know, clearly, and I've also thought this as well, is that New York, in its name, the new means something, because one of the things that it does two things. It embraces the new, and then it also is also a definition that anybody that I know that is a New Yorker is always in a constant path of becoming or reinventing themselves to become. And that happens it's like person by person, community by community, right? And I think a part of that is the greatest competition in the world, which is we are an immigrant city at its core. And so you've this influx of new people coming in all the time. And when I got here, I was, you know, like you, I went and looked for a neighborhood that was going to embrace my Latino-ness. There's like, come on, it was, you know, at the time, what I loved about, and what I continue to love about Harlem, as I'm sitting here today in our studio here, is that it is the mesh of Afro-Latino. Right. And there was a small Mexican population, which is my background, but I got to know a different kind of Latino for the first time in my life. And by the way, speak a completely different Spanish and culinary experience. And like, it was like the convergence of things and the convergence of history through food. But that's something the city embraces. And I haven't ever found that anywhere else in the world that we've been.
I mean, listen, I immigrants are the beat, the heart, the soul of New York City. I can say that because I know it and I feel it. I live it, you know? I mean, beyond Black Americans, my neighborhood, Bedford-Stuyvesant, is a huge, I mean, it has the largest, huge Caribbean neighborhood. It has the largest population. Central Brooklyn has the largest population of Caribbeans living outside of the Caribbean in the U.S., right? So I also got a very quick and fast education on the connections of Black Caribbeans and Caribbeans in the American South. What does it mean? How did we all get here? Why are we all here? How did some of us migrate here, and how did some come, you know, through immigration get here? So I was able to dig deeper into that on a cultural level and an educational level. And also just when I look at that community and look both of those communities and look at myself and just see how I have grown and changed and constantly keep evolving, how the neighborhoods keep morphing and changing. and I'm still here. And I'm like, am I really still here? Did I like take a COVID pause and then come back? Because this city, I don't know. On the craziest day, I can walk out and I'll bump into someone that I know and I haven't seen since pre-COVID. And I always say that's God telling me this is where I'm supposed to be. Okay. That has happened to me so many times over the last 2 years. And like, you know, as you know, food media and media in general has imploded. It's changed so much. Like, it's given me like a lot of like sad days over the last year. But I'm in a city where I can like really sit down and craft what I want to do next and connect the dots of who I want to connect with or what I want to do and start to slowly make it happen. And I think no matter who you are, if it's meant for you to be here and you want to switch careers or you want to try new things, New York is the space to do it. I always joke and say that if you want to be a flamethrower on top of a brownstone with people only wearing red shirts, there's a group for it. Like
always, absolutely.
I mean, like for that very specific, for only the red shirts, right? Anything that you want to do here in this city, you can do it. And you can also find that person who invented the red shirt, I feel like sometimes, and which makes it even more interesting. So that excites me still. Yeah. That gets me going. I mean, I think the older you get, the more expensive the place gets. Sometimes it's harder for you to find that energy. It takes a lot of work getting outside of the house, getting out of your routine. But it's still here.
Oh, it absolutely is. And I think it's just manifesting a lot differently post-COVID. Like it is in many different big cities. You know, I spent some time in San Francisco and I came back for all the reasons that you have just hit home, which was, you know, if I was going to come back, I was coming back to Harlem. If I was coming back, I was getting, you know, it was very focused in all the reasons to anchor back in New York. And you've touched on so many. You know, one of the things that I think that, you know, and you're absolutely right, it could be the very niche or the broad. It doesn't matter. There is something for everyone. Whatever your shtick, whatever your passion is, it is a place, but it is hard. It's not easy. It's earned.
And I will say I'm speaking for, and I always, you know, check myself and say to myself, I'm speaking from a very privileged, creative place, you know. I mean, I didn't talk about it a little bit, but I grew up in a very working middle class, and I'm doing air quotations when I say middle class because, you know, I grew up in a neighborhood, you know, my family owned a house, like everyone around us owned a house, but, you know, next door, there was the nurse, there was the first Black city councilwoman, there was the school teacher, but my mom worked for 30-something years in a chicken poultry, you know, cutting chickens. She never intended to do that. My folks were hardworking people, blue collar class folks. So I understand what it means to get in the car with my mom and go pay the light bill at a certain time because they're literally going to cut it off if they don't get the money at this certain time. So I stand in gratitude that I can be here in New York because it is a city that's morphed and changed. And a lot of my friends and colleagues and neighbors are all going somewhere else because it's so expensive. And, you know, once you start having kids, like some of your dreams, some of the things that you want to do. And I never thought that I would understand that in totality, they get pushed down because you want a better life for your children.
Absolutely. No, I completely get it. And you're absolutely right. And the interesting part is you have to decide which life you want, because you know, very similar to you, you know, I could have gone home to Texas or we could have stayed in Chicago, and lived out in the burbs where it was super affordable. And, you know, it was, but what I also knew was that by raising my children in Harlem, that they would be, you know, first of all, they would be amongst their people. Number two, they'd have to make their way. And the other part of this is that I love about raising children is that it is one of the only places that we talk about being like, our generation being the helicopter parents and stuff. And I said, not in New York City necessarily. I said, New York City, because you have to navigate the mean streets, right? The potholes, everything, like everything that is the grit of New York. So do your children. And that's actually for me as a mom of four who, all of my kids went through the New York City public school system. Was so glad for it because when we travel home and I compare education and where they are and their completeness and their level of ability to be more resilient, to adapt is absolutely a New York City thing. And I don't think you can train that into anybody. You can't like bottle it up and put it anywhere else. But as kids, there is something about being safety in numbers. I always felt like people were like, hey, why don't you guys think about going to the burbs? Because there was something about the burbs that I'd never felt safe about. There was, there's something in isolation isn't safety to me.
Yeah. And for me, what I feel about the burbs is that, and no judgment, I want to say this in a way that I don't offend anyone. But I'm amongst so many people who made the choice to live their life that way, which is fine. And sometimes I envy it. I'm like, can my life just be normal? And I want that sometimes. And every now and then I like to go visit and be like, this is great. But then it gets really like it's a silence that there's an underlying silence that I don't like. I like what's going on outside? Like the chicken wings on the sidewalk,
That's right.
Absolutely. A little craziness every day. The crossing guard on my street dancing to get the kids across. Every now and then I want a little creative vibration. And the burbs, it's just a straight, quiet line.
Yeah, no. You will never get the action. Look, I in my first couple of years in Harlem, we lived upstairs from an Afro-Latino lesbian bar. Like Saturday nights were a ruckus. We would just sit either on the stoop, or hang out the of the window where the fire escapes were on a hot summer night and watch the action because it was worth the price of admission. It was
totally
so worth the price. Like nowhere in the world are you going to get this experience.
And listen, for me, and I'm not saying all creatives, because, when I'm creating and when I'm writing, I like to be in a little solitude, but to get inspired, I need to be seeing the color, right?
Yeah.
And that, what you just described is the color, right? It gives you energy, seeing someone with, the flash shoes on, or hearing someone's accent, or, bumping into someone who just so happens to be dropping their new music and they're performing at Brooklyn Museum. That gets me excited, and it gets my creative juices flowing, and I need that. Adrian calls it tension. And I'm like, he's like, you need that tension to be a creative. Like, you need a little bit of tension. I'm like, but how much? Can we do? How much?
Well, and he's taught me a lot about the tension, but I also think there's something there's a hustle. Right. To your point, that it's the person dropping their thing. It's the bodega owner, who's done something just a little bit different at their bodega. Like their chopped cheese is different than their chopped cheese. There's a competitive spirit that isn't mean, right? It's not about it's mean or we're better, but it's like, but I'm trying to better myself. And it's that reinvention thing. Nobody sits stagnant. And you're absolutely right. And you bring up there's a little bit of crazy. And forgive me for all of those the mentally challenged out there. But when you're walking the streets, there's going to be a yeller on every street. By the way, it's the guy who yells and clearly needs some medication. Maybe doesn't have that, but you take them in, and you know who that person is. Yes,
totally.
The yeller at the end of the block. It wouldn't be a Friday night. It wouldn't be a Friday night without the yeller.
And listen, I will say two things that you just said. I think that builds empathy as
Yep.
well when you're in a very isolated bubble, when you're only seeing perfect Stepford type things. I have empathy now when I
Yeah.
see now I can really see what's happening in this world in terms of the homelessness
Yep.
in New York City because I'm around it. I can say without a doubt, like, no, majority of the people who are homeless here in New York City have mental health issues because I see it.
Yep.
I'm not just talking out the side of my neck, right?
Nope.
I literally see it. And
We
we're
see it
amongst
every day.
You also said a word that I want to touch on, the word that I now hate.
Tell
and
me.
I'm trying
Tell
to
me
figure
about it.
out another word, hustle.
Oh,
Man, that
okay.
it's like I want to I'm trying to redirect that word of hustle because I feel like what I'm doing, I've moved beyond the hustle phase now.
Yeah.
Like the hustle is I moved beyond it. What is the word? I don't know the word, but what is the word that I'm doing now in my creative life? I feel like the days of doing a podcast for no money and
Yeah.
figuring out how to do media is a hustle. I feel like now I want a word that speaks to a person who is leaning into her power. And
Yeah.
a friend says, you know what, I know you don't have any money right now to pay me to be your business manager / creative partner, but let me just come on and manage your speaking engagements. And no longer you're gonna no longer be charging X amount of money to do any speaking engagements. This is what it is. And since that's happened for me, I feel like, oh, I'm not hustling anymore. I'm not hustling. I'm standing completely in my truth. I know my worth, and I'm not hustling anymore.
Yeah. 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 I always think about hustling a little more like the dance.
So let's call
Not
it a dance.
necessarily the free dance either, but it is and I look at the quality, at least for me, is that I tend to find my growth moments are doing things that I'm totally uncomfortable with. Right. And in those growth moments, let me start with, I am a terrible dancer. So anything having to do with movement, always comes from a place, but you're right. I mean, I think that absolutely gets connotated to, hey, it's working for free or working for below your value. And that by any stretch of the imagination is an evolution of where, look, everybody does it. Everybody sometimes feels like they have to do it, but where do where does that end, and where do you begin to appreciate and bring forth that value so that the folks in the room know your value when you're there, in a way that is respected, and you continue it.
How to get out of the hustle phase, right? Like I feel like there's a phase of like you hustle, and I'm not gonna say you pay your dues, but like you do a lot of dues paying in that hustle phase, right? And I think you got to move out of it. And in my mind now, as I'm talking to you, I feel like I'm always trying to stay out of the hustle phase, right?
Yeah.
Am I doing a dance? For sure. I think I'm always doing a dance because I can't have my eggs in one basket, right? Am I trying to pitch a show about Juneteenth? Am I trying to sell another book? Do I still want to be able to write somewhere on a regular basis? Yes, that's the dance for me. But the hustle is what I can fully say I worn my cap and gown, and I've gotten that,
right. You've graduated
that diploma.
from it. That makes total sense. As we think a little bit, we've talked about, I think one of the important things is that in this journey, you have published, you've not just been a ghostwriter thing, you've actually published under your name. And, I want to make sure all our listeners know, one of my favorite cookbooks. And by the way, it's my favorite cookbook that I look at the pictures. Let me say that I look at the pictures and I go, okay, if I was with Nicole, what would I want her to cook? And then I turn to David and go, hey, boo, you going to cook that recipe? So for my listeners, Um, David loves the art and the craft of the doing of cooking. I like going through the book to pick what I want to have cooked for me and eat. That's the
I'm
difference.
not mad at that. I'm not mad at that. I am not mad. If you have someone that can do that, yes, go for it.
Um, so, look, Nicole's also really important 2 nominations for James Beard Awards in the category of Best Personal Essay, right? The short form, and then Innovative Storytelling. And one I found about your Juneteenth book harken back to, like I had told you, I grew up in Texas in a relatively, like primarily, predominantly Latino culture, but I stumbled on to Lucille B. Smith, right? And Lucille B. Smith in Texas, right, was very much at this, like the crux of number one, right, the all-purpose hot roll mix, but really brought Black culture into culinary arts, and more important, culinary as a business with like college commercial food programs over at Prairie View State A&M. And, that was kind of when I hearkened back, when I read through your book, I felt taken back to a moment in Texas where you go, I haven't seen this done since the 1940s. Because I think one of the things that, what it did is I learned about Juneteenth through your eyes. But I felt like I got to go on a journey through the culture. In ways that I had never been taken through ever.
I'm glad to hear that. That's one of the things that was intentional. I wanted people like to go on a journey through Texas and the American South and the U.S. and hear the names of entrepreneurs, hear the names of everyday people, extraordinary people. So that was my goal. I'm glad you got that. And oh my gosh, you bringing up Miss Lucille's name is so important. The first time I heard her name is because Tony Tipton Martin, James Beard Award-winning cookbook author. She wrote Jemima Code. She has a ton of books. She's written and talked about her so many times. And just to hear that her name is like in the mouths of folks like you, that's so freaking important. And her grandson, Chris Williams, he's amazing. He has a restaurant in Houston, and he carries on her legacy of entrepreneurship and, doing things just beyond the ordinary in the kitchen. And so that's what I wanted to do in the book. I wanted it to be more than just cook these recipes on Juneteenth. It's going to serve, hopefully, as an artifact of Black life now and Black life, 1865 and beyond. So I'm glad to hear that from you. People can pick that book up and read it front to back and not make a thing. And you'd be surprised how many people email me or tell me that, like, I was in bed and I read the entire book.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm glad to hear that.
I've done it twice. And I've done it, and one of the things I've also done is it's a great gift, by the way. Because when you get the gift of somebody else's culture, you find things in your own diaspora that you find commonalities with. And to me, I've always found that, there was one thing that I love about food beyond the way that it tastes, but it's also sometimes a tool of diplomacy in a time when, very much this country agrees on, but we agree on our food. And the other part was discovering things that were like right under my nose. I was like, how did I not see it? And then intentionally planning the thing that I needed to go do. So an example of this was like Chef Leah Chase, right?
Wow. Yes.
Big icon. If it wasn't for your book, I wouldn't have done the research. It was like, I wouldn't have been able to go doing like, oh, well, when I go to Louisiana, this, I got to go be looking for Dookie Chase restaurant. So,
and I love too that you're gravitating to like very strong entrepreneur women who basically created legacies beyond like one generation. Like those two women, like they left like a treasure trove of what to do, how to be, and how to constantly evolve.
yep.
Like at Miss Chase's death, who I actually met before, very lovely lady. Her grandsons, her sons, all of them, they're opening stuff at airports. Like she understood that like this is bigger than me. This is not just about my fried chicken and green gumbo that she has once a year. Like this is about community and like being an example for women, Black women, and really all women of how to lead in a way that's in your face and unapologetic.
You hit it right there on the nose. Unapologetic. And there's something at a time, by the way, when it was against the freaking law to be it's one thing now we say unapologetic and what it means, but to be a Black woman in the 1940s in the South and be unapologetic, there were dire consequences to that.
100%. And she did not care. I mean, like, she hosted meetings, she raised money, she did all kind of things that her entire family could have been dead, and or people could have bombed up the entire restaurant. Just to be unapologetic and like stand your ground of this is who I'm going to be, like it or love it, is amazing. And what I love about her is her art collection.
Yeah.
Like, she has an amazing art collection that she started. People don't talk about that enough. It's like a ton of it inside of Dookie Chase, but I think that I know for a fact, maybe the Ogden, I think I'm saying that right, museum has a few of her borrowed pieces. She has an amazing art collection. Like she was into supporting local artists and regional artists. That to me just like screams everything about what it means to be a real woman who is entrepreneurial.
No, absolutely. And I think if we just take it to when I talk about like the diplomatic culinary, thing that the James Beard Foundation does, right, with the U.S. State Department. And then it was, you've got a whole chapter in there just talking about just phenomenal things. And I wanted to research, where did these things come from? And so as I was getting through, then, you get into B. Smith, right? Barbary Lane Smith, right? And there is absolutely, then you go, one of the things that was really interesting around for Barbara's journey but her innovations, but she comes out, she's got a portfolio of books, home goods, restaurants, really when we talk about entrepreneurial, created a brand. But even when she gets diagnosed, I think she was in her 60s at this point. She gets diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. But even in that evolution, she's still bringing the power of food to even talk about what it meant to be, the relationship between Alzheimer's and food, and that brand, and still being able to make those connections later in her life. And it's just one of those stories where I just go, wow. And it actually was one of the things that when we think about food and our diaspora, but also our health and the health of our people, about what the role of food plays in. And for listeners, if you have not read, there's also a phenomenal book that is like, I went from Nicole's book to learning about B. Smith, then to reading Before I Forget. And Before I Forget is B. Smith's book, right? Around just the love story of her family, but the caregivers and her loved ones, and how connected caregiving and food were and are.
I haven't read her book. I remember that book came out. The story that I remember about B. Smith and Alzheimer's is that she was in the city, in New York City, and she was taking a bus to the Hamptons or to her house out east, and she got confused and she was lost. And I remember that story. I remember her and her husband, who it's kind of funny because, you know, at the end of her life, he got a bad rap, right? Of like, you have to Google it if you have it on.
Yeah.
He got a bad rap, but the people who know, he was very instrumental in helping her make business decisions and making like moves that are still a part of her brand. Like her stuff is still in some of the stores now, her home line. But when I saw her on the Today Show speaking and looking so beautiful, she's always been like a super elegant woman. And all the people in the industry who have met her, I hear the same thing over and over, that she was very nice and very kind. But even if you go through her cookbook, she wasn't saying, you know, this is a healthy whatever. She cooked the food that she ate. Did she do celebration foods, what I call celebration foods, when many of my colleagues call celebration foods, meaning, you know, macaroni and cheese and fried chicken? Yeah, she did those things in the book, but she also was very much about like showing beautiful salads and not shoving it down our face saying this is what you need to do. But she was just really showing how she ate, and showing her cultural foods as well. So for me, I look at B. Smith as one of the folks who definitely is early pioneer, even before her Alzheimer's journey, of saying that Black food is not just one way. No. All Black people are not interested in just eating, you know, high fat food 7 days a week. This is our cultural food. We should not shun it. We should celebrate it. But guess what? Most Black people don't eat like this every day. And here are cookbooks to show that. So she was very cognizant, clearly, of the connection between health and food, how it heals, how it makes you feel, and open the doors for me. But definitely I would have to say Bryant Terry, my dear friend and colleague who has several books around veganism and Black culture, Afro-Vegan, Vegetable Kingdom. I mean, like, he's a pioneer. I always tell him and tell people professionally that he opened the door after B. Smith. He opened the door for me to be able to do books that are beautiful, that we can come as our whole selves, books that we can just do food and it doesn't have to be about our culture. Brian Terry 100% is responsible, I think, for opening that door for that next generation of Black cookbook authors and talking about health in a serious way.
So what'd you think?
Oh my goodness. You know, Nicole just has this infectious energy about her that just exudes personal authenticity. You know, Nicole has said that the recipes speak to a place where a story is ready to be told and there is always sweet tea chilling. And as one of two people in this space that have cooked our way through her cookbook, that cannot be any more true.
I absolutely agree with you. Besides her infectious energy, her creativity is just unbound. I love being around her. And I love, you know, one of the things I love is that she talks the way that she really engages and makes food accessible to people in ways that I don't think that all chefs or even all writers really think about. Because, I mean, food is something that we all eat and we all actually, you know, we all eat, we all drink. I think one of the things that's really important about Watermelon and Redbirds is that it really, when it was released, coincided with really the official American launch and truly like a national observation of Juneteenth.
Yeah.
And so as we're coming up on Juneteenth again, to revisit some of our favorite summer cookouts that are in the book, but also some of those other parts that I think are really important in the idea that the things that we ingest are actually medicine. She really is making this connection around the importance of culturally healthy.
Yeah, food. Culturally healthy food that tells a story. Because while it is an adaptation of the comfort foods that did come from the South, that did come from slavery, it doesn't mean it still has to be that hard, heavy food, it is still amazing. And it makes you feel good afterwards. It doesn't make you feel heavy. It doesn't make you feel groggy. It makes you feel filled in the best way possible. And, as someone who got the fortune of living in Harlem and experienced Juneteenth before it was an official holiday last year, she did such a perfect job of embodying that spirit and giving the rest of the world and the nation that story through food.
I absolutely agree with you. She's much more than a cookbook author. That lived experience of coming from Georgia, moving to Brooklyn, and embracing the diversity of everything that New York City has to offer, I think is so embedded in her ability to constantly be innovating. And we have to, for our listeners, for those of you who listen to season 1, you will know when she's talking about Adrienne, she's actually talking about Adrienne Franks, who is her partner in life. And they have this marvelous son.
So adorable.
Oh my gosh. You know what? If two people could come together, two more creative come together, I always think about them as creative combustion, right? It's like an explosion of wild innovation between the two of them. And so when she came out with her book, one of the things that was so beautiful to see, as somebody who has worked with Adrienne and has known both of them as human beings for a while, to see her success made me so happy. And it made me so happy to see how happy Adrienne was for her success, that she had a partner, a creative partner who was pushing her out of her comfort zone and always really anchoring her in just being herself.
Exactly. I mean, that's what she said, that when she didn't know what she was doing, Adrienne said, be yourself. And that is the best advice. I know it seems cheesy, but that is. You cannot go wrong if you are just being authentic. You see that in Watermelon and Redbird and the Up South cookbook. Nicole is just her, and these foods and recipes are just telling us about her.
And guess what? I think she's just getting started.
Absolutely. On that note, read us out.
This episode was written and produced by the AI Design Corps at Aurora 21 in the heart of New York's magical Hudson Valley. Special thanks to the musical talents of Rachel Bickley, our podcast sound designer. Our theme music was composed by Substance Studios. If you're already following the show, you're well on your way to designing a better future. If not, what are you waiting for? It's time to join the magic. Go to your favorite podcast service and search Designed By with Joanna Peña-Bickley and hit follow.
Design the future.